Russia's media looks very different from most news coverage around the world. CNN contributor Jill Doherty has the details for us from Moscow.
At the very same time that CNN and other Western media were showing the attacks in Kiev, Russian TV was not showing live coverage from Kiev. In fact, it was showing pre-taped reports, some of them very dramatic, showing reporters in flak jackets standing in front of tanks, but coming instead from that breakaway region in the eastern part of Ukraine, the Donbass region, where those two breakaway republics that were recognized officially this week by Russia are located. This is all part of the messaging from the Russian government on state TV, constantly showing the people in those locations claiming that they are the victims of genocide, that they are being attacked by the Ukrainian government. The Ukrainian government, of course, denying that. But it is an attempt to justify the steps that the Russians are taking now to remove that government, which they argue is illegitimate. And also another piece of really dramatic video today, and that was President Putin. He was directly addressing Ukraine's military, urging them to turn against their leaders, saying that you should take power in your hands, and also calling the government in Kiev terrorists, drug addicts, and neo-Nazis. Again, another way of demeaning and trying to give the impression not only to the people of Russia, but to the world that the attack that they are carrying out in Kiev is justified. Jill Doherty, Moscow.
All right, Ukraine considering a proposal to hold talks with Russia, according to an advisor to President Zelensky. But what shape would those talks take if they were to go ahead? Our next guest may have a clue. Vera Michelin-Shapir is the author of Fluid Russia, Between the Global and National in the Post-Soviet Era, and is a visiting research fellow at the King Centre for Strategic Communication in London, where she joins us now. It's great to have you on. So talk now of the potential for talks between Russia and Ukraine, if they happen, and that is still a very big if. Will Volodymyr Zelensky's removal be at the top of Putin's list of demands? What's your read?
Hello, good morning. So yes, it's a big if whether these talks will happen. And I think that the talks, how they will happen and what will be their outcome is very much determined by what is actually happening militarily on the ground. We're seeing that the Russians moved in and they may have thought that this would be easier than it actually sort of panned out for them. They used limited force. They can use more force to to establish themselves militarily, but everything they did in the beginning did not seem to break the Ukrainians. And that brings us to the kind of point where the negotiations can happen. Because for the Ukrainians, if they're stronger on the ground, they understand that the Russians can bring more and more force in. And actually, when we're looking at Syria, the Russians don't have to blitz it. They can go neighborhood by neighborhood and wear down Kiev and wear down Kharkiv. They have the force for that. But if the Ukrainians can put enough resistance for the Russians to understand that this will be difficult, then they can come to these negotiations from a much better position. And hence, the military assistance to Ukraine is so crucial at this point.
I wanted to tap into your expertise to ask you this. Do you think post-Soviet states, which have moved in recent years towards the West, would be justified in fearing fallout from all of this, fear being on Putin's radar next, if not short term, longer term?
Definitely. This is definitely a direction that we're already seeing. We're seeing this movement in Moldova. We're seeing movements, kind of unhappy movements in Kazakhstan, in Armenia. All of this is already appearing now. And especially it is appearing because, unfortunately, we hear very senior strategic thinkers from Russia saying that this is actually the end of the post-Soviet era, that sort of Russia will reestablish the former Soviet space under its control. So this is obviously very concerning. And if we're talking about a sort of creating unity, I think that down this line, and we're still it's the beginning of the fighting in Ukraine. We still don't know what will happen moving forward, but we see that it will be difficult for the Russians. So yes, this would, I envision that it would create a problem for the Russian and post-Soviet space. Although we also have to take into account that also this war that was until very recently unthinkable, is also creating fear. It's spreading fear among former Soviet states. So we do have countries, for instance, like Georgia, that actually their leadership said that they're not going to join sanctions against Russia, although they condemn the war. So it's still shifting, but my prediction is that it will not work. It will not work for the Russians in the former Soviet space.
Right. I wanted to ask you this too. When it comes to Putin's reasoning for war, he has, well, frankly, twisted history and made some incredible allegations of, genocide and Nazism, and bearing in mind that the president is Jewish. What do you make of how he has justified the invasion?
Well, this is a complete twist of history, and I think a very good example of disinformation, how disinformation works. You take certain facts that may be true from history, and you twist them to such an extent and create such a fictional, a twisted and malicious narrative about a country that is actually very close to the Russians. A nation that is so close culturally and ethnically to the Russians. But the thing is that we have to understand that this was created, this narrative that was created over the past couple of weeks, it didn't just sprang out of nowhere. The articles by Putin and Medvedev were creating this narrative. And what this narrative is there to do is sort of to dissuade Russians or kind of to veil the truth from the Russians, the kind of the truth that is clear as the light of day, that Putin is taking them to war with a friendly, neighborly, and brotherly nation to them.
And just briefly before we go, how would you interpret Putin's view of Russia's national identity in the context of this conflict?
So I think that Putin is actually fighting very strong undercurrents in his own society. I mean, the Russian society, if you look at how young Russians think and speak, they're moving in the direction of convergence with global values. And he is a man of a different generation. He built his whole regime on resisting these trends. He twisted again with a very strong sort of campaign of 20 years of disinformation about what happened in the 1990s. He twisted it. So Russians think that he actually can bring them some kind of stability and security. But I mean, he is fighting, in my opinion, this is a lost cause, because what he's doing is that he's saying that he's bringing back some sort of stability and security for Russian identity, for Russians to feel great again. But really what he's doing is that he's taking them to this war, trying to sort of to hide it with all this disinformation. But at the end of the day, these currents are stronger than him.
Right. A fascinating insight.